streaming. And now let's see here. All right, we will start momentarily. Give me 1 second while I try and find the live stream. Go live, I guess. Later. Wait, I could do it literally via YouTube. Let's try this. Set up a live stream now. Streaming software. Let me just make sure that it's not like, oh, there's already a broadcast here. Oh, no, we are live. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, it just took a second to load. Okay, so we are live. Save. Make sure that it's not like, oh, there's already. And then just make sure that is the URL. Okay, great. Yes. Okay. Go ahead, save and exit. Wisconsin poll results live stream. Okay, save. When should we send this email? Send now. Okay. Should be good. Send now. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Chaz Nuttycombe. I am the Executive Director of State Navigate. And today we are going to be going over our final Wisconsin Democratic primary poll. We were in the field from Monday through yesterday about noon is when we closed the poll. And obviously, there's a lot to go over. So we're going to be maybe taking questions kind of throughout. We'll, ask if there's any questions from the press as we kind of go over each of the pages. With me is Michael Foley, our elections coordinator. He does a lot of the field work for the poll. And Mary Radcliffe, our data manager, does a lot with poll ethics and adds team notes, helps with scripting a whole bunch of stuff. And Michael does a lot of the heavy lifting with all the field work, sending the text and everything. So let me go ahead and bring over, let's see, am I going to be able to share my screen on Google Meets, I assume? Yeah. So, okay. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and bring the poll here. And then share screen on Google Meets, and it's just going to be this screen. Okay. Everyone see my screen? Wonderful.
Chaz, can you zoom that in a little bit?
Yeah, give me 1 sec. I forgot to tweet out the live stream link. Wisconsin. Okay, this is the link.
A little bit.
Yes, okay. All right. Yeah, let me go ahead and zoom in here. So, we have 1,473 likely respondents in this survey. Margin of error, 2.3 points or percent. And again, the field dates were Monday through yesterday, so August 3rd through August 6th, 2026. Text to online or text to web is the format that we used. And we use the Alliance Forge for texting, sending the text, i360 for the voter file, and we also looked at the previous electorates to try and determine the weights. So, okay. Survey demographics. The demographics here are a little bit different from our first survey, and we'll get into reasons why at the end when we kind of get in some team notes. But our electorate here is a little bit more ideologically moderate than our first poll, right? I believe it was like 21 or 22% of our last poll was Democratic Socialist, and now it is 17%. We'll get a little bit more into that later. Our sample is also a little bit more high propensity, meaning that there are more voters here who voted in 4 out of 4 primaries, whereas last time there was about the same amount of voters who voted in 4 out of 4 of the last primaries, and voters in the last survey who voted in 1 out of 4 primaries. So this is much more high propensity, as we would call it. Okay. So we're going to get in the top lines, and then we have a lot of really interesting data that we didn't have in the last survey that we will be going over. So give me 1 second here, and we will get into it. Let me just go ahead and post. Okay, so the governor primary, Hong is at 44% when we push leaners, Crowley at 22%, and Roy's at 11%. Barnes is down to 6%, Brennan at 5%, and Rodriguez at 3%. Hughes now at 0%. And undecided / don't remember. Don't remember meaning if we ask them, or if they tell us that they have already voted, and they say don't remember, that's where they go to. So Crowley has gone up by 7 points since our last poll, as well as Roy's has also gone up by 7 points. And then Barnes has gone down by 8 points. Brennan has gone up by 1 point. Hughes, has dropped out of the race a while ago, but she's gone down now to 0. And the undecideds / don't remembers have gone down. I believe they're at 17% last time. So we have fewer undecideds. Makes sense given that we are a little bit closer to the actual primary. Okay. And then we also have other top lines here for what it looks like when we push people who chose a candidate that withdrew. So if they chose in this survey Mandela Barnes or Rodriguez or Missy Hughes, we go ahead and we just say, hey, while the candidate you have selected is going to appear on the ballot, they withdrew over the summer. Knowing this, who do you plan to vote for? And they can still go ahead and vote for that candidate if they want. So it looks a little bit different with Crowley going up by 2 points in that scenario, going from 22 to 24%, and Barnes going down from 6% to 3%. But this is the main top line we want to present because there may be quite a bit of voters who don't know that a candidate withdrew from the race, 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks before the primary, and they go ahead and still vote from the voting booth, right? Of the people who have already voted, 48% are Hong, 14% Crowley, 13% Barnes, 10% Rodriguez, 8% Roy's, 5% Brennan, 0 Hughes, and 3% don't remember. And so we had 539 people who we recontacted since our last survey. So most of our survey is new respondents. Those new respondents skew more moderate, lower income, more rural, older as well. But among the people who took both of our surveys, and when waiting, that gets down to 539 likely voters. Hong goes up a little bit with those compared to last week. The biggest movement amongst the recontacts is 5% of those recontacts went from Barnes to Crowley, 4% from Hong to Roy's, 3% Barnes to Hong, 3% undecided to Crowley, 2% Barnes to Roy's, and then we've got some more like 2% and 1% here. So Roy's going up was really interesting. I thought that was really unexpected. Maybe there's like some sort of Roy's Mensum or whatever going on in Wisconsin that none of our team who obviously doesn't live in Wisconsin, people on the ground there may know about. But Roy's and Crowley have increased their percentage in the electorate by the same percent, right? Going up 7 points since our last poll. Okay, so now we have a Sankey diagram of what it looks like of every respondent from poll 1 to poll 2. So you can see, those who didn't answer poll 1, and are in poll 2 where they went to, and then like the drop off. And when we talk about, like potential non-response biases, we definitely want to check, okay, what does it look like amongst the people who didn't answer our second survey, right, for potential non-response bias? Well, they actually, and what we're really looking for is like, are they a little bit more like pro-Hong? And actually, they're less, pro-Hong. They're 41% Hong compared to 44% of our first survey, right? Crowley is at 16%, which is 1 point better than what he had in the overall first poll. Royce and Brennan about where they were, and Barnes about where he was. I believe he's like 1 point higher here. So I think that, and then we had like more people who were undecided from the first poll that answered, didn't answer the other one. So we had about like half of the people that we contacted in the first survey come back to this one. So the fact that this one is a little bit less, Hong is, I think, a little bit of a good omen for, something in Wisconsin not repeating in Michigan, but we will talk about Michigan in a bit. Where Barnes voters went. So amongst the people who took both surveys and were Barnes voters in the first survey, right, they were a little bit more pro-Roy's here. I think that Roy's is doing a little bit worse compared to the Barnes voters with their second choice in our first survey. But what is interesting is that it looks like they broke a little bit more to Crowley. So they were like 25. They said their second choice, right, in the first poll. 25% was Crowley, 21% Hong. But there's an 11-point gap between Crowley and Hong amongst those Barnes voters compared to the first survey. So they broke a little bit more toward Crowley than expected. And 46% of those who stated the second choice candidate went to it. Okay. So this is fun. This is amongst our recontact sample for those percentages, right? Again, Hong amongst those recontacts is at 47%. And et cetera for the other candidates. So what does their coalition look like? Well, so Hong's support is mainly from people in her first survey, which makes sense. That was a lot of the first survey, right, and a lot of the current recontact. Still a little bit less than what the overall result was in our first survey. But you can see that there's been a lot of movement from candidates to candidates since last week. Only 51% of the recontact sample Crowley voters had last week Crowley as their candidate. Now, part of that is, 19% of the new Crowley voters in the recontact sample had Barnes as their preferred candidate. And then Crowley's also earned a little bit more with undecideds. And then what's really interesting is that it looks like Roy's has mainly, she's also gained with the Barnes voters, right? More than expected. But she's also taken quite a bit of these Hong voters since last week. So her increase not only comes from Barnes voters going to a second choice, but Roy's also seems to be taking a little bit from Hong, which kind of makes sense. She's like now the second most progressive candidate in the race, according to, our first polls perceptions of where the candidates are ideologically, right? She's also from Dane County. So that's not a little bit, that's not really surprising all that much. And then amongst the current Brennan voters, only 46% had Brennan in their choice last week. So there's a lot of soft support really here amongst these non-Hong candidates, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Second choice currently amongst all the likely voters, it was Barnes was the most common second choice last week, and now it is Roy's, just barely edging out, Crowley by like, tenths of percentage points here and everything. Amongst the Roy's voters, their second choice is Hong, 34%, and then Crowley, 29%, Brennan, 20%. Amongst the Brennan voters, their second choice is Crowley, 30%, Roy's, 24%, and Hong, 14%, which is not really that surprising when you think about where voters perceive these candidates ideologically, again, compared to our first survey where they see themselves. Roy's has a little bit more of a progressive coalition. Brennan has more of a moderate Democrat coalition. Okay. Now, where the second choices go, and this is like our overall survey, right? You can see, here, well, I really want to save time for questions, so, people can come back here and go to the link if they really want to look there. So, we had this idea of, like, what does it look like if we had a even narrow race, right? Let's say that starting down here, it's Hong versus Crowley versus Roy's, right? All the candidates who have double digits, right? Let's say Brennan did drop out. Crowley would benefit the most. He would go up to 25%. Hong would go up to 45%. Roy's would go up to 13%. And then Hong versus Crowley versus Brennan, right? Let's say that it was Roy's who dropped out. Hong would go up more, which is not surprising given, again, those second choice allocations. She would get the biggest bump, and then Crowley go to 27, and then Brennan to 7, and other candidates are at 7. And then, of course, the head-to-head, right? Hong would still have a very big lead in a head-to-head. 49% Hong, 28% Crowley if it was just those two candidates. 11% go to other candidates. Now, again, like, you do have like some Roy's voters who maybe their second choice was Brennan and vice versa. So maybe, a little bit more of those voters go to Crowley if they aren't choosing Hong. But we're not going to, bug them with a third choice, right? There's no ranked choice voting in Wisconsin. But there has been dropouts, so we would have been wanting to ask them their second choice. Okay, and then in the treasurer primary, pretty similar result to what we had last time. Yi Len Ziong is up 10 points with the leaders. And then it looks like amongst the people who have already voted, he's gone up by a few percentage points, with a majority of people now saying, for those who already voted, that they voted for Ziong. And because there's not a lot of spending and attention to this primary, 28% of those people who already voted don't remember who they voted for. So maybe they either don't remember or maybe they didn't vote in this primary. Where the field sits. So we didn't ask like people's perceptions of the candidates this time. We really wanted a quick, short survey. So the average Hong voter is very progressive liberal. The average voter overall is a progressive liberal, and that is also where the average Roy's voter is. The average Crowley voter is center left, and the average Brennan voter is also center left, but just a little bit more moderate than Crowley's voters. Okay, and then we also asked, if the general election was between Hong and Tiffany, right, who would you vote for? So we have the detailed support here. And again, this is a decent amount of Tiffany voters, but we also have Republicans in our survey. So we wanted to narrow and see what it looks like just amongst the Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents. 91% say they would go to Hong, or at least are probably voting for Hong, right? Most of these people, though, are definitely voting for Hong. And again, this is only amongst the primary electorate. This is not reflective of all Democrats in like a general election in Wisconsin. Is something to note here. And 2% would go to Tiffany. 3% say they wouldn't vote, and 4% don't know. Okay. And then we have general election by primary support, right? So amongst the voters in our survey, their candidate choice here, how would they vote in that November general election? Well, 77% of Crowley voters would vote for Hong. 9% say they would vote for Tiffany. 7% would vote or would not vote, and then 6% don't know. Roy's voters, that's the second largest group that is pro Hong. Not surprising again, since her coalition is more progressive. And then the least likely, for voters who are voting for a candidate that is not withdrawn, that would support Tiffany, is the Brennan voters. But obviously, not a lot of people here. But also, the Republicans in our survey, most of them, if they have a vote choice, are going to these more like center left candidates or moderate candidates, like Brennan and Crowley. And you can see that in the crosstabs. So when we talk about when someone from the opposite self-identified party is voting in the opposite party's primary, right? Are they mostly voting to screw over the party that they're going to vote against in November to get them a less electable candidate? Or are they going to vote for someone who's more closer to them ideologically? The answer is the latter. Almost always, people want to vote for who they like and who they believe is closest to them. That's true in general elections, and that is true in primaries. That's not to say there isn't a little bit here, right? If you were to really zoom in, of these people who are voting for Hong, there is a slight bit of people who say they would vote for Tiffany in November. But most people, if they are Republicans voting in a Democratic primary in Wisconsin, they're probably voting for the more moderate candidates. Okay. Big question, I'm sure, that are probably on people's minds is Michigan, right? So we decided to do another batch of text to more rural voters, more Republican voters, more lower income voters in our second survey here on our last day. And that was, those texts went out on Wednesday, right? The day after the Michigan primary. We made that call because that was kind of the common thing that we had heard for why the Michigan polls missed. Give me 1 second here. I do want to go ahead and put the live stream tweet in right below the Twitter post for the results. So, look, primary polling is hard. It's much harder than a general election. Why is it harder than a general election? G. Elliott Morris had a good kind of live stream about this. I also talked with Elliott, talked with a lot of people ahead of this poll's release. Zachary Danini, Adam Carlson, Patrick Raffini, and Elliott, and people on our polling committee, of course, Nick Getter, but when I was talking with Elliott, he kind of made the point of you can, when you weight your poll in a general election, you usually weight by party or something, right? Either party registration or party ID, right? Or maybe you weight it by a previous election result, right? But you don't really have that in these primary polls, and it's probably not going to be smart if you try and ask a primary poll respondent, hey, who did you vote for in let's say the equivalent primary that would be useful for this, right, is the 2020 Democratic primary for president. Did you vote for Sanders or Biden? You're going to have probably more people who say they don't remember or don't know, or that they didn't vote in that primary. So, that's kind of the big thing here is the typical primary polling average is 13 points. The Michigan polls were off by 12 points. So could there be a Michigan polling error here? Yeah, there could be. And maybe Hong is overrated. There's also maybe some evidence though in our poll that we could undershoot Hong and that she gets maybe a majority of the vote. And we can get into that in a bit. Primaries are hard to poll. And one of the states I think is probably the hardest to poll for a primary is Wisconsin. I'm from Virginia, and we have a great voter file, and you're actually able to see, did someone vote in the Democratic primary or Republican primary in Virginia, right? You don't have that in Wisconsin. You just see they voted in a primary. So you don't really know who voted in previous Democratic primaries. You also have a very, very awful voter file. You have a lot of people who are vampires in Wisconsin, according to the Wisconsin voter file because they have a birth year of 1800. Why is this? Well, the election administration, in the way that they run it in Wisconsin, they let their local officials, be vassals and run their own little fiefdoms and update stuff when they want to update stuff. Right? There's no like centralized, really authority for election administration in Wisconsin compared to somewhere like in Virginia. So for someone to be able to say that they can confidently tell you what was especially the age demographic breakdown of the previous primary electorates, in Wisconsin, bless their heart, because they're not going to be able to because especially if you're just taking the voter file at face value and you see a whole bunch of people, it's like, oh, they're over the age of 65. You've got those vampires in there, and half of those probably vampires with a birth year of 1800 are under the age of 30. When we looked at people who we polled who have a birth year of 1800 in our poll, half of them were under the age of 30 in our previous survey. This is the other thing, though. We're not going to, ignore Michigan, right? So we have changed our poll weights here. We have halved the 18 to 29s. They were at 18% in our last one, and it's 9% in this one. It is very, very hard to imagine, like, for someone to say, oh, the 1829s are going to be, like, less than 7% or something, especially when the absentee requests are, like, what, 6%, 18 to 34? And this is a demographic group that usually votes late, right? We've seen this in cities across the country, and they like voting on election day, right? Older people like voting early. Younger people like voting later, right? You can see this in a general election or a primary. That's usually what happens. So we've made the electorate older, right? It was what, 1/3? I think it was 34%, 65 plus in our last survey for the weighting. Now it is 43%. So 43% are over or at the or above the retirement age in this survey. We've also bumped up the black share a little bit, going from 7% to 8%. We've decreased the Asian and Latino share by about 0.5%, and the two or more races or other by like 1%. So, we feel that this is the best possible thing that we can do to try and avoid a Michigan polling miss. I say the best thing we can try and do because if there is some sort of response rate from Hong voters, like there seems to have been in Michigan with just El Sayed voters, they just really wanted to answer the polls, whereas the Stevens voters didn't, right? There's no way to weight yourself out of that, right? Especially when you don't know, and no one knows for sure what the previous ideology of the electorates look like, these Democratic primary electorates in Wisconsin. So we are prepared for a miss in either direction. We could overrate Hong, and that would be something kind of similar to Michigan, or we can underrate Hong. There's a little bit of evidence for both, and we'll get into that in some of these team notes. Okay. Mary, do you want to go into the propensity?
Yeah, so I just have a couple notes here about sort of what the demographics look like for support for Hong versus other candidates. So high propensity voters are the least likely to say they are planning to support Hong. Among voters who have voted in all four of the last four primaries, Hong leads by only 8 points, which compared to the top line of 22 points is a pretty significant difference. For voters that have participated in 3 of the last 4 primaries, she leads by 15. She leads by 32 among those who've participated in 1 or 2 of the last 4 primaries. And for voters who have never shown up for a primary, she leads by 50 percentage points. So she's really relying on voters who don't typically show up to the polls to come out and support her. Now, to be fair, she does lead with all of these groups to some extent or another, but that big wide lead is driven by people who don't typically vote. We see pretty significant difference by income as well. she is weakest with the lowest income voters, and she is strongest with the highest income voters. So voters that say they make less than $30,000 a year favor Hong by 18 percentage points. On the other end of the spectrum, voters that make over $150,000 a year, she's ahead by 28 percentage points. So pretty significant difference there. I will say though, we see these differences on the propensity, higher propensity voters, less supportive of Hong, but her voters are significantly more likely than voters that are voting for other candidates to say they are definitely locked in on their choice. So among those who have not yet voted, 67% of Hong voters say they are definitely voting for her, where when you look at any other candidates, voters that pick any other candidates, only 44% are definite. So there's still quite a lot of fluidity in those anti-Hong voters that we could see sloshing around to other candidates.
And I kind of want to also rephrase that kind of point in a different way when we include the like already voteds. 75% of the Hong voters have either already voted or say they're definitely voting for Hong, right? 51% of the Hong voters say they are definitely voting for her. 22% are probably voting for her. 24% say they already voted for her. 3% after we push leaners say they are voting for her. Crowley is 40% definitely voting for Crowley, 39% probably, 14% already voted, and 3% lean. So Crowley has pretty soft support, to Mary's point. Roy's 39% say they're definitely voting for Roy's, 37% probably, 15% already, and 10% lean. So Roy's definitely also has some soft support. And, with Brennan, he has the softest support. 21% of the Brennan voters say they're definitely going to Brennan, whereas 47% just say they're probably voting for him. 23% do say that they already voted for him, and 9% say they're leaning to him. So, yeah. Michael, you want to go on your note on the area codes, which I think was really popular in our last survey. A lot of people texted me and DM'd. They're like, the area codes is really cool. And I think this is like the first survey we've kind of had this kind of crosstab breakdown in. And because of this area code stuff, I've learned the acronym FIB and what it stands for. So, Michael, go
Find out
ahead.
my buddy. Yeah, find out my buddy. Anyway, yeah, we called phones from different area codes. We know the area code of the people that we are reaching. We keep track of that. And Hong generally performs best among those with an area code out of Wisconsin. We saw that in the first poll. We saw that in this poll. She's winning those people, transplants we'll call them, by 36 points, 54 to 18 over Crowley. When you go to the 414, which these days is mainly Milwaukee County, with a little bit of Waukesha County, but it's mainly Milwaukee County. Crowley has his best performance there. He's only trailing there 35 to 31. I think in the first poll they were tied. So there's no really statistically significant change here. But you have to remember, if you look at the 262, which is the Milwaukee suburbs around Milwaukee, Hong is actually leading there by 26 points, 45 to 19. Now you might be a little bit surprised that in the WOW counties, Hong or people that have area codes from the WOW counties, Hong is leading, while in the central Milwaukee County area code, she's not, or she is very, very slightly. And the reason for it is the 414 was split back in the late 1990s, and I suspect that a lot of the people who had 414 area codes who are older still have 414 cell phone area codes, while the 262 is a little bit younger. And as we've seen in the crosstests before, Hong leads among younger voters, and Crowley does better. That doesn't lead among older voters. We also broke down by region, which doesn't take into account area code. It's based on the voter file. We broke the state into 10 regions: Milwaukee County, WOW, the WOW counties around Milwaukee suburbs, the outer Milwaukee TV market, which includes Kenosha and Racine counties, the Green Bay core BOW counties, outer Green Bay TV market, Dane County, the rest of the Madison County DMA or TV market, La Crosse, Eau Claire, Wausau, which we call Central and Northwoods in the crosshairs, because it also includes a small piece of the Marquette TV market, which is in Wisconsin, and Duluth and Minneapolis TV markets. We put into one. We put into one region. The takeaway from that is that yes, Hong leads in all regions. Crowley performs best in Milwaukee County. He's at 31% there, but he still trails Hong by 11. Closest region is actually the outer Green Bay TV market, which includes places like Door County. Hong only leads there by 8 points, 35 to 27. And unsurprisingly, Hong's best region is Dane County, her home base in Madison, where she leads 57 to 19 over Crowley.
And something I did want to hop in on that, Michael. I was looking at like the 2016 Democratic presidential primary results, and in those rural areas, those rural counties, and outer Green Bay TV market, those were kind of the weaker Sanders counties. So compared to the last survey, I thought that Hong was probably going to sweep every county. But I think that if I were to guess based on what we have and the remaining undecideds, is that Crowley is probably going to win at least a couple of or if not several really of these like older rural counties, kind of like what Stevens had in Michigan. Okay, Michael, go ahead on the other team notes, and then we will take questions.
Yeah, the two notes are weighting matters and sampling matters. It's just technical, nerdy stuff about how we weighted and potential alternative weightings. Choose your own polling adventure. We actually stress test our top line results by waiting for the worst case scenario for Hong, which is youth voter 18 to 29 cratering to 7%, African American voter turnout going up to 8 to 10%, seniors going up to 51%, and we adjusted the other age range accordingly. Even in that unlikely scenario, Hong still leads 41 to 24. We also tested for an absurd situation where moderates made up 90% of the electorate, moderates and conservatives. And even then, Hong still leads 35 to 20. Undecideds increased from 10 to 18, but that's basically a function of the moderates and conservatives in the I-360 sample being more undecided and less likely to vote. So there are more undecideds in that sample. On sampling matters, we actually sent about 42,000 texts to new respondents. Like Chaz said, on Wednesday, we deliberately tried to send texts to the harder to reach lower income and rural voters. On Tuesday, actually, we sent a lot of texts to minority voters as well. We were trying to, in the new sample, contact some subsamples that weren't in the first, weren't as represented in the first poll. The thing is, though, that even after, and if you look at the cross-test for the old versus the new sample, the recontact versus the new sample, 46% of people in the recontact sample support Hong compared to 42% in the new sample. It's not really that different. And this is despite the new sample being a little bit more moderate. I think the score, the ideological score for the moderate sample is 7.0 on our ideological score versus 7.3 for the recontact sample. 16% of the new sample said they were Democratic Socialists compared to 19% of the recontact sample. So it was a little bit more moderate, and it's a little less pro-Hong, but not really all that much.
Okay. All right. Well, do we have any questions for the press? Okay. All right. Well, if there are no questions, or if you do have questions and you want to email it to us, or email to me, my email is chaz@statenavigate.org. Thank you all so much for coming, and have a good day.
Thank you.